This was one of the most stunning and powerful displays of American successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night.
President Trump now promising to run Venezuela and take control of its massive oil reserve.
So President Trump is commending at least one move by Venezuela, releasing their political prisoners.
On January 3rd, 2026, at 2:04 a.m., a city asleep, a government erased before sunrise, a world stunned by the impossible. Caracas was still wrapped in darkness. Streetlights hummed faintly over empty highways. Vendors' carts sat abandoned along sidewalks. In residential neighborhoods, families slept through another night of rolling blackouts, something so common it no longer caused alarm. For most Venezuelans, hardship had become routine. Inside Miraflores Palace, guards followed procedures drilled into them for years. Radios crackled with static. Shift logs were signed. On paper, the Venezuelan state still existed. Then the silence broke. A distant concussion rolled across the city. Military radar stations went offline almost simultaneously. Satellite uplinks were jammed. Command networks, built over decades to defend the state, collapsed in under 4 minutes. Above Caracas, fighter jets tore through the night sky.
F-16s flying overhead at night this week. You're not imagining things.
Electronic warfare flooded every frequency. Orders couldn't be transmitted. Units couldn't coordinate. Confusion spread faster than fear. By the time the city began to wake, the operation was already over. As dawn approached, a single message reached intelligence agencies, governments, and newsrooms around the world. Nicolás Maduro had been captured, not removed by protest, not overthrown by a coup, not forced into exile, but seized alive by United States forces inside the borders of a sovereign nation. Hours later, the U.S. president addressed the world.
Trump has said that he planned to deliver a statement that's going to happen later on this morning,
stating that the United States would temporarily oversee Venezuela to ensure a secure and orderly transition. For Latin America, it was a shock. For Washington, a declaration. For the world, a turning point.
We will make America great again, and we will do it with the best interests of the American people at heart.
But this moment did not begin that night. It was the final chapter of a story written over decades. A story of oil, ideology, collapse, and power. Black gold broken nation, the resource that built and broke Venezuela. Long before troops moved through Caracas, Venezuela's fate was decided beneath its soil. The country sits atop the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, a resource so vast it shaped Venezuela's identity, politics, and destiny.
We'll prevail, united as one nation, stronger than ever.
In the early 20th century, oil transformed Venezuela from a largely agrarian society into a strategic global supplier. American companies arrived first. Refineries rose. Ports expanded. Caracas modernized at breathtaking speed. By the 1950s, Venezuela was one of the richest nations in Latin America. Its capital rivaled European cities. A confident middle class emerged. Oil flowed north to American refineries, factories, and consumers. For decades, the relationship was simple. Venezuela supplied oil. The United States supplied capital, security, and influence. But oil also created a dangerous dependency. Agriculture was neglected. Manufacturing stagnated. Entire sectors of the economy withered as petroleum revenue became the lifeblood of the state. Power concentrated around those who controlled oil money, and resentment quietly grew. In 1976, Venezuela nationalized its oil industry. The move was celebrated domestically as an act of sovereignty. Relations with Washington cooled, but the alliance endured. Few understood then that oil would not only fund the state, but eventually consume it. Soldiers' Revolution: How Hugo Chavez Rewrote Venezuela's Identity. In 1992, a little-known army officer attempted a coup. It failed, but his brief televised address, defiant, emotional, unapologetic, turned him into a national figure overnight. His name was Hugo Chavez. 7 years later, Chavez won the presidency by promising dignity to the poor, and independence from foreign dominance. He spoke the language of resentment and hope.
We must stand united for Mooners, for our future. This is our moment to reclaim what is rightfully ours.
He framed Venezuela not as a failed state, but as a nation robbed of its destiny. Oil prices surged during his rule. Billions poured into government coffers. Chavez used that wealth to fund massive social programs, clinics in poor neighborhoods, subsidized food, public housing. For millions, life improved. But Chavez also changed the rules. Institutions bent toward the presidency. Courts lost independence. Media outlets were pressured or shut down. The military was reshaped into a political force loyal not to the Constitution, but to the revolution. Internationally, Chavez positioned Venezuela as a challenger to U.S. power. He forged alliances with Cuba, Russia, China, and Iran. He mocked American leaders on global stages. He cast Washington as an empire in decline. To supporters, Chavez was a hero. To critics, an autocrat. To Washington, something more troubling. A resource-rich leader proving that defiance could work. When Chavez died in 2013, many believed the revolution would die with him. They were wrong. The heir without the crown. And Nicolas Maduro was never Hugo Chavez. He lacked charisma. He lacked legitimacy. And most critically, he lacked oil money. When Maduro assumed power, global oil prices collapsed. Venezuela's economy, built almost entirely on petroleum, imploded. Mismanagement accelerated the decline. Corruption became systemic. Production collapsed. Infrastructure decayed. The numbers were staggering. Inflation climbed into the millions of percent. Salaries became meaningless. Savings evaporated overnight. Supermarkets emptied. Hospitals lost power. Doctors performed surgeries without anesthesia. By the early 2020s, over 7 million Venezuelans had fled the country, triggering one of the largest mass migrations in modern history. As desperation grew, Maduro responded not with reform, but repression. Opposition leaders were arrested or exiled. Protests were crushed. Elections were widely condemned as fraudulent. Venezuela was no longer just poor, it was failing. Sanctions, pressure, and a dead end. Why economic warfare didn't remove Maduro, Washington responded with pressure. Economic sanctions targeted oil exports, banks, and senior officials. Venezuelan assets abroad were frozen. Diplomatic recognition shifted to opposition figures. The strategy was simple: starve the regime of money, force collapse from within. It didn't work. Sanctions devastated ordinary citizens. But Maduro's inner circle survived. Black markets flourished. Loyal security forces were paid first. By the mid-2020s, U.S. intelligence assessments reportedly reached a grim conclusion. Sanctions were not removing Maduro. They were entrenching him. Worse, Venezuela was no longer viewed solely as a humanitarian crisis. It was increasingly framed as a security threat. That shift changed everything. From dictator to target the criminal case. U.S. prosecutors accused Maduro's government of operating a state-sponsored narco-terrorism network. Court filings alleged cooperation with drug cartels, trafficking routes protected by the state, and profits used to fund repression and weapons. The narrative was powerful. Maduro was no longer framed as an authoritarian leader. He was framed as a criminal enemy. And criminals, Washington argued, could be captured. This legal framing quietly laid the groundwork for something unprecedented. A multipolar battlefield. Why Venezuela became more than a country? Venezuela was not alone. Russia provided advisors and weapons. China extended oil-backed loans. Iran supplied fuel and technology. Cuba embedded intelligence personnel. To Washington, Venezuela had become a foothold for rival powers in the Western Hemisphere. By late 2025, U.S. officials increasingly spoke of hemispheric security and containment. History was echoing. Operation Southern Spear, the escalation no one noticed. In the final months of 2025, U.S. naval power surged into the Caribbean. Carrier groups, surveillance aircraft, special operations units. Publicly, Washington announced Operation Southern Spear, a drug interdiction mission. Privately, intelligence sources suggest preparations were underway for something far more decisive. Oil tankers were intercepted. Smuggling routes collapsed. Revenue streams vanished. By December, Maduro's options were gone. The night the state collapsed, Operation Absolute Resolve. Just after 2 a.m., January 3, 2026, the operation began. Electronic warfare blinded air defenses. Precision strikes neutralized key installations. Special forces moved with intelligence gathered over months. There was no invasion, no televised war, just speed, silence, and shock. Within hours, Nicolás Maduro was in U.S. custody. By sunrise, Venezuela's government had effectively ceased to function. A nation holds its breath. Venezuela without Maduro. Inside Venezuela, confusion reigned. An interim authority was announced. Curfews were imposed. Calls for calm echoed through state media. Some celebrated openly. Others feared occupation. Many simply waited. Was this liberation or the beginning of something worse? The world reacts, power politics returns. Latin America split overnight. Some governments welcomed Maduro's removal. Others condemned the operation as imperialism reborn. Russia and China denounced U.S. aggression. Cuba mourned fallen personnel. Global institutions debated legality, but power had already shifted. A president in handcuffs, the trial that could change everything. In the United States, prosecutors prepared a historic case. For the first time, a sitting foreign president faced trial as a criminal. Supporters called it justice. Critics called it a dangerous precedent. If Maduro could be tried, who was next? Liberation or occupation? Oil, order, and an uncertain future. Venezuela's future now hangs on unresolved questions. Who governs? Who controls the oil? Who rebuilds trust? Who pays the cost? And perhaps most importantly, has the United States reopened a chapter of history it once promised to close? The day history turned, on January 3, 2026, will be remembered as more than a military operation. It was the moment oil, ideology, and power collided, reshaping the Western Hemisphere. The question now is not what happened, it is what this moment unleashes next.